In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up email and password authentication using Better Auth, Hono, Drizzle ORM, and Postgres. I'm also going to show you how to send emails from our application using Mailgun, which can be used for sign-up verification and password resets. By the end of this video, you'll have a working Hono app with authentication that you can use as a template for your own Hono apps. The prerequisites for this tutorial are a basic understanding of TypeScript and REST APIs. I also add chapters to all of my videos so that you can skip around and watch the sections that are most relevant to you. And I also always add a link to the code in the description, so don't hesitate to copy the code. The code is free to use. If you want to code along with me, you're going to need to have Bun installed, and you can find instructions here on their website. And you're also going to need to have Docker installed, and you can find the instructions here on their website. So you might be thinking, what is Better Auth and why are we going to use it? Well, it is a TypeScript authentication library. And the reason that we're going to use it is because it's very robust and production ready. It has all of the features that users expect in modern websites, such as email and password login, social sign-on, and two-factor authentication. Now I'm going to quickly walk you through the outline of this tutorial so you know exactly what to expect. First, we'll set up a new Hono app from scratch. Second, we'll set up a Postgres database using Docker. Third, we'll install and configure Drizzle ORM for database interactions. Fourth, we'll install and configure Better Auth. Fifth, we'll create and set up a Mailgun account for sending auth-based emails. Sixth, we'll set up the logic to send verification emails. And seventh, we'll add protected routes that can only be accessed by authenticated users. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a brand new Hono project from the command line using Bun. I'll choose the Bun template and then install the dependencies using the Bun package manager, and we're ready to go. So here is our new Hono app. Let's take a look at what we have. We have an index file with a hello Hono route. That looks good. And then we've got in our package JSON a dev script to run our local server. So let's go ahead and test this out. So we can pull up our terminal and run this script. And then we can see we're getting that the server is here on port 3000. So that's looking good. And then we can actually hit this route to test it out and make sure this boilerplate was set up correctly. And I can do that by creating this HTTP file. And that works with an extension. It's called the REST client extension. So you want to install that if you're following along with me and using these HTTP files. And then in here, we can put the URL. // and then we can just click the send request button, and there we go. We get a 200 OK, and we get hello Hono, which is the response that we were expecting because that's what it's sending back here. Now the next thing I want to do is set up our database. So if we take a look at the Better Auth documentation, we can see here that Better Auth requires a database to store user data, which makes sense. That's what we're going to need to do. So I'm going to use Postgres, and they've got an example here of their auth file. So in order to set up our database, we are going to use Docker. So I have Docker installed, and I don't have any containers running at the moment. And what I'm going to do is create a Docker Compose file that will spin up a Postgres database for us. So we've got this docker compose.yaml, and to start out, we will say services, And you can have multiple services, but for us, we're just going to have one. It's going to be Postgres. And then we need to specify the image. So the image comes from Docker Hub, and Postgres has some official images, and we can say we want Postgres version 17.5, and then we can set a restart policy, and I want my container to restart unless I stop it specifically, and then we can set a container name as well. So for this example, we're going to be doing a basic to-do app because they're simple to understand. So we can call this Hono to do Postgres. And then another important part here is setting up our ports. So inside of the Docker container, our database will be running. And the thing is, it's not accessible to our operating system. So we need to actually port forward. That's what's happening right here is our database is running on port 5432 inside the Docker container, and we want it to be accessible to port 5432 on our operating system. That way, our local running app can interact with the database. And then we'll need our environment. So these are some environment variables that we can set. And we can set the Postgres password, user, and database so that we can connect to it. And these, the username and password here does not need to be secure because Docker Compose is just spinning up a database for us locally. This isn't going to be deployed anywhere. So we can just use password and user and keep things simple. So now we've got this Docker Compose file. We want to actually run it and get our database up and running and going. So we can do that with a script, and we can add it in here so we don't forget it. And we can call it database up and say docker compose up -d. And then we can run this database up inside of our terminal. So I can open up a new terminal and say bun run database up. And we can see it working, downloading that Postgres image from Docker Hub, and it's done. So if we go jump over to our Docker desktop, we can now see that we have our Hono Better Auth, and inside we have the Hono to do Postgres that we set up. And it's that Postgres image version 17.5, and it's port forwarded to 5432 on our operating system. So now we have a running database and we can access it. So we are ready to go. So now that we have our database set up, the next step is to set up Drizzle ORM so that we can actually interact with our database and create tables and query our data. So over here in VS Code, before I do that, I want to actually create a new branch. So you'll see these 3 blue dots here. This is because I have initialized this as a Git repository. So you can do the same thing by pulling up your terminal and doing git init. And since I've already done that, I'm not going to run that command. But what I do want to do is create a new branch. And this allows us to kind of create checkpoints as we're working on our code. So I can say Hono Better Auth work in progress. And then I can enter in a message like to summarize what work we've done here. And commit that, and then publish this branch, and I have this connected to GitHub. So now our work is being saved. and that's just good practice. So now that I have all of those changes pushed up, what I want to do is install Drizzle. So if we come over, I have the Drizzle docs pulled up. They have some get started information here, and they recommend installing these various things. So Drizzle ORM, Postgres, .env, Drizzle Kit, and the types for Postgres as well. So we're going to go ahead and install most of these things. And if I jump back over to VS Code here and I pull up my terminal, then I also need to close that one. All right, it's acting a little buggy, so we'll come back over here and we'll say bunadd drizzle ORM and PG, and it had also recommended .env, but I'm not going to install that one because bun can actually read the environment variables directly, so we don't need that one. But Drizzle also has a seeding library we can install, so Drizzle seed, and get those added. And then we want to also add our some dev dependencies. And the dev dependencies don't get bundled in with production code. That's why they're installed separately. So we can say bun add -d for dev dependency, and there is Drizzle Kit. And there are types for PG. So if we jump back over here, we see Drizzle Kit, types PG, and TSX. And I don't need TSX because bun can also run TypeScript files. So TSX, if you're using Node, then TSX can run TypeScript files for you. It'll do the transpiling. But we don't need that using bun. So I'll add these in. And now we've got our dependencies installed. So that looks good. And the next thing we want to do is set up our environment variable files. So we can see, over here, set up your connection variables. So we want to create a .env file and then add the database URL so that Drizzle can connect to our database. So back over here, I like to create a .env example file. That way this will get pushed up to the Git repository so your fellow programmers on your team can see it, and then copy this and create a .env that will just be on your local machine. So let's go ahead and add our database URL. And this is going to be Postgres QL user password at localhost 5432/todos. Now, where I got this from, you can see user is from our Docker Compose user password, user here and password here. So that's where these are coming from, and then the database of todos. So we have user, password, and then the database of todos. And if you remember, we mapped our database to port 5432 on our local machine. So that's where all of these different segments of this URL are coming from. And then this will allow Drizzle to connect to our local Postgres. And so as I was saying, we have a .env example. We want to copy and paste that, and then we can rename this to just .env. And then in our git ignore file, we can see .env is being ignored. So you can safely put your secrets into the .env without it being pushed up to a Git repository. And then you can have examples inside of here. And since there's no confidential information here, I'm okay with pushing up user password 5432 because that's all right here. So whoever pulls this repository can then run the Docker container and copy the .env and get up and running quickly. Cool. So now that we have our environment variables set up, we need to connect to our database with Drizzle. So in our source directory, I'm going to create a database directory. And then inside of here, I'm going to create a database.ts file. And this is where I'm going to connect to the database with Drizzle. So we need to import Drizzle. And you can see we get a lot of options here. I want to import from node Postgres. If I can see that in my list here. Oh, there we go. Node Postgres. Okay, perfect. So that's what we're using. And then I'm also going to import the pool from PG. And then I also want to import the schema. And I don't have the schema set up yet. So we can quickly create a schema file. And I'm just going to leave that blank for the moment. So back over here, we're going to say import star from schema. Whoops. Import star as schema from, and then / schema ts. There we go. And then I can set up the pool. And inside of here, this is where we'll get some TypeScript autocomplete connection string is what I want. And then I want process.env database URL. And we're pulling that from here. So we'll see our database URL will get pulled in. And then I also like to set a max number of connections so the database doesn't get overwhelmed. And 10 is a good default. And then the last thing is an idle timeout. So if there's any connection to the database that's just sitting there not doing anything for some reason, it will time out after 30,000 milliseconds. And then the last line of code that we need here is our database export const database. And we use that Drizzle function, provide it the pool, and then a couple of options. So we can provide it the schema here that we're importing and the casing of snake case. And the reason why we're putting snake case is because with JavaScript and TypeScript, we write code in camel case. So you can see that example here is camel case. But it's common in databases to use snake case for the table names. And so this will automatically make it so our table names are in snake case, but we can continue to code our JavaScript, TypeScript in camel case. So that's really convenient. And we're getting an error here because I have not actually set up the schema ts file. And the reason why I haven't put anything in schema ts is because Better Auth has a CLI, you can see here, to generate the schema required for Better Auth. So that's going to be the next step in the next chapter is we're going to install Better Auth and generate the schema. So at the moment, we'll finish setting up Drizzle, and then we'll have that schema. So jumping back over here, there's another thing that I want to do down here in the tsconfig. This is kind of a quality of life addition here. So we can add base URL of dot, and that will just specify the base URL for our root of our project. But then what we can do is add paths, and we can say @/star source. We can specify the source here and then star. Now, the question is, what is this doing exactly? Well, it helps us manage our imports better. So if I come back over here, instead of saying // for schema, I can actually put the @ symbol here now, and you can see we're getting that autocomplete. So then I can say database/schema. So instead of having a bunch of .. / file paths, we get this nice clean @ symbol, which will point to our source directory. So that's just a quality of life thing. It makes all of our imports look so much cleaner. I love it. So feel free to add that into your tsconfig and make your life a little bit better. So now that we have that, we can set up our Drizzle config. And that goes in the root directory here. So let's add that, Drizzle config ts. And in here, we're going to import the define config from DrizzleKit. Define config. All right. And then we can add this default define config. And we can add our options in here. And so the first thing we're going to put is an out directory. So this is going to tell Drizzle where it should put the migrations that it generates. So here we're going to put them in source/database/migrations. And it will automatically create this folder inside of our database folder when we run a migration. So we haven't done that yet, but we will do that shortly. Then we can tell it where our schema is located. So here we can see our schema is located in source/database/schema.ts, and gotta love that autocomplete. And then the dialect we also have to specify is Postgres for us. So here, PostgreSQL. And then we can do our database credentials, and this is going to tell it the URL where our database is located. So we can say process.env.database URL. Okay, and then the last thing is also that snake casing. Perfect. And let's see what we have here. We've got an error, and that is because TypeScript is unhappy with URL of string or undefined. So basically TypeScript is saying, hey, this database URL from the environment, it could possibly be null. And we know that it's not null because we set it here in our env. So I'm just going to put that bang operator there to tell it that we're okay with that. So that'll make TypeScript happy. All right, now the last thing we need to set up with Drizzle here is a couple of scripts. So in our package.json, I can come over here and I can add a script for generating a migration, running the migration, and then firing up Drizzle Studio. So we can say generate migration. And then this is tied to Drizzle kit generate. And then we can run for migrate. We'll run the migrations. And then the last one here is Studio. And that will fire up a GUI locally that will allow us to interact with our database. It's very cool. Cool. So at this point, Drizzle is all set up. We can connect to our database, but we don't have our schema yet. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to install Better Auth, and then we're going to have Better Auth generate our schema, and then we'll actually be able to see it in our database. So now that we have the database and Drizzle set up, we can install and set up Better Auth. So I'm over here on the documentation, and the first step is to install Better Auth. So let's go ahead and copy this command. We'll jump over to VS Code, open up the terminal, and we can paste it here and install. And there we go. Then let's jump back over to the documentation. and see what they say to do next. So we want to set up our environment variables. So Better Auth requires a Better Auth secret and a Better Auth URL. So let's go ahead and copy both of these. Open up our .env example. And get our Better Auth URL as well. Now, the question is, how do we get our Better Auth secret? Well, this is something that we're going to generate, and there are a lot of ways to generate a secret, but Better Auth actually has a CLI. So here I'm in another part of their documentation under concept CLI. They have this secret. So they have a terminal command that will generate a secret for us. So let's go ahead and use this because that makes our life easy. So we can open up our terminal, plug this in, and I'm using bun. So bun has a bunx command, so that'll just run this terminal command right away. All right, so now it says add the following to our env, the Better Auth secret. So it gave us this big, long, random string of numbers and letters, and that's what secrets always look like. So that seems good. And, you know, another good step here is if one of our fellow developers was pulling this repo down, they wouldn't know what to do with this .env example. So we could go ahead and put this in here as a comment so that anyone else who pulls it down in our .env will know that they need to generate a secret. And actually, because this is the env example, I'm going to pull that out of there, and we are here. I can copy both of these at the same time and put it into the .env, our real env. Good, now that's set up, and then I can delete this one so that if someone else pulls this repo down, they know that they need to generate their own secret. Cool. So jumping back over to the documentation, after our environment variables are set up, we need to create a Better Auth instance. And it says we should put it in one of these specific locations, a lib folder or a utils folder. So I'll put it in a lib folder. And here's kind of the basic setup of what it should look like. So let's copy that and jump back over to our code and say source lib and then auth ts, and we can paste what they had in there for us. And this doesn't give us a whole lot, putting a comment in there. So let's see what they recommend to do next. So we want to configure our database. We're using Postgres, and we have this database pool. And if we keep scrolling down, we can see they have a specific Drizzle adapter here. And that's what we want because we're using Drizzle. So more specifically, we could just copy this and replace this here. And this import's close. The @database, and then we have our Drizzle adapter set up and ready to go there. So this is coming along. The next thing I want to do is make sure we have the email and password functionality set up. So here in the Drizzle documentation, they say we need to specifically identify that or set that up. And so here you can see an example of that is basically email and password enabled true. So we're going to want this line of code. There we go. And then if we jump back over, the next thing I want to show you is creating the database tables. So this is what I mentioned before. They have a CLI command to generate our schema. So we're going to run this, and it should hopefully create everything that we need. So if we open up the terminal, paste it in here, switch this out for bunx, run it. Do you want to generate the schema? Yes, I do. Success. All right, and we can see we've got this brand new file here, auth-schema. So let's take a look at this file. And you can see it's importing from Drizzle, and it has created our Drizzle schema for us. It gave us a users table, a session table, account table, a verification table. So this is looking good. Everything worked with that, and I'm actually going to cut that all out of this file, and I'm going to move it up to database schema. So I had left this file blank before because of this exactly. I knew we were going to need to move our schema over here, or the generated schema, into our official Drizzle schema. So now that we have this inside of here, we can actually run our migrations, and that'll be the last step in our database. We'll have all of these tables, which is very handy. So let's delete that file. We don't need it anymore. And in order to run our migration, we added this script not too long ago. So let's go ahead and run that. Bun run database migrate. So I've got this error here, and the reason for this is it's trying to apply migrations, but I actually missed a step and I forgot to create the migrations. So let's take a look at this quick. So we have another script to generate the migrations. This will take a look at our schema, and it will write the SQL for us needed to insert these tables into the database. So we just need to run this script first. So bun run database generate migration. Did I make that? Yeah, migration. And there we go. Now it's seeing our 4 tables. We have a migrations folder. We can see that it's created the SQL for us to create table account, create table session, etc. So that's all looking good. Now we can run the migration, and it will put it into our database. There you go. Migrations applied successfully. So let's take a look. Let's see if these are actually in our database. And we can do that with bun run database studio. And that's going to open Drizzle Studio for us. And then we get this link to the local Drizzle Studio. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to jump back over here to the browser. Let's plug that in and see what we get. Okay, so here's our GUI, our interface into our database, and we can see over here on the left-hand side, we've got our tables. We've got accounts, sessions, users, verification. So it looks like our migrations were successful. We now have our tables in the database. They just don't have any data right now. So let's go ahead and jump back over here to our code. And actually, let's go back to the documentation. So in here, the next step after we now have our table set up is to add our routes. So if we come down to step 7, there is a Hono option here, and this will add all of the Better Auth routes for us into our app. So just with this line of code. So if we copy this and we come back over here and we go to our index file, that is the root of our project. And I'm going to put this below the hello world route. And now I have 2 apps, so I'm going to delete that. And let's see. So it's unhappy because there's the semicolon on the end, and these are chained together, so we don't want that. And if I save, it gets some formatting for me, and now it looks like we are all set up. and this text is spilling over a little bit. So let me go ahead and reduce the font size so that we can see it a little bit better. There we go. So what is this doing here? It's saying that on post requests and get requests, we have this set of routes, API/auth, and the stars mean that there are multiple. And then we have this auth handler. Now, this auth is being imported from our libauth. So that's coming from here, from our Better Auth setup. And so to better explain what exactly is happening here, there's a plugin that they provide for us that'll give us a really good visual. So let's take a look at that. Over here in the documentation, they have this Open API plugin. So let's add this into our auth ts file. And then I need the import for it. Better Auth plugins. So now to open up our API spec, it tells us to navigate to API auth reference. So we need to start up our local dev server. If we come back over here, I can open up another terminal and say bun run dev. And now we're started on localhost 3000. So if we jump back over to Google, and it's API auth reference, so localhost/API auth reference. And here we are. This is our spec. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. And Better Auth has given us all of these routes by default right out of the box, which is pretty incredible. So just to like close the circle here and help you understand what's going on, is that here in our index, we had added this post get API auth handler. And this one line of code added all of those routes for us. It added social sign on, get session, sign out, sign up with email, forgot password, etc. So we now have access to all of these routes, and we can go ahead and test it out. And we can test it out inside of this interface too, which is really handy. So let's see. We've got our database up and running. We got our migrations done. Drizzle setup, Better Auth is installed and set up. So we should be able to sign up a new user. And over here, you can see what's required. So we need to provide a name, an email, and a password in order to sign up a new user. So it has this test run here. Let's go ahead and see. It gives us a bunch of options we can pick from, and we're using TypeScript. So let's see if we can find maybe a node. Yeah, there we go. Node fetch and test request, and we click that and it pulls up this little interface for us where we can actually click send. So here our JSON payload is empty, so if I send it, let's see what happens. Well, we get an invalid email error, and that's incredible. So these routes, they come with validation built in as well. So let's see now if we add in the required fields, we know that name is required, and let's just say test@test.com and a password of 123. Now if I send this, we get a 200 OK, and we get this response back. We get a token. So this is the token that gets added into a cookie and then allows us to make follow-up requests. So now we're signed in basically, and we get a user ID. We've got the email and name. And so if we jump over to our database, we should see this user in the database. And here we go. We can see we now have one user, one session, and one account. If I click on the user, there I am, Nick Olson with my test email, email verified a false, and we've got our created at and updated at, etc. So it went ahead and it created that user. So this is pretty amazing. Basically, what you're seeing is Better Auth is now set up, at least a basic form of it. Before I show you Mailgun and we set that up, I wanted to show you open-cli. This is a handy little tool that we can use to open up our API docs from a script. So basically what this looks like is open-cli, and then you provide the URL and it will open it for us. And so let's go ahead and install this so I can show you why this thing is valuable. Let me close that and say bun add -d as a development dependency, open CLI. All right, and then with that installed, let's bun run dev again and jump back over to package.json. And then from here in our package.json, we can add a script. We'll just call it open auth docs. And we can say open CLI, and then we can provide the link that will open our API documentation for Drizzle. Or, sorry, not Drizzle, for Better Auth. There we go. That way we don't need to remember this, because this is something I would definitely forget, /API auth reference. But when you store it as a script, it's very convenient, and most of us work on a team with other programmers. Our teammates will see this and say, oh, hey, I can open up these docs. That's cool. So then if I run this with the terminal and I say bun run open auth docs, it jumps me right over here to the API auth reference, and I can now go ahead and explore. So this is just a handy quality of life feature that I wanted to show you. So in this chapter, we are going to set up Mailgun. And the reason we're going to do that is because we need an email client to send emails to our users. And one of those features would be email verification. Another feature would be I forgot my password and I need to get an email so I can reset it. So here in the Better Auth docs, we can see that they have an example here. They have this send verification email function that will provide us with a URL and a token so that a user can be verified with that token. And they have this send email function. But up here, their import, they say your email sending function. So we need to build this function out ourselves. And so we can do that with Mailgun. And if you go over to Google and search Mailgun, this is the website. There are other email delivery service providers down here, but I chose Mailgun because they don't require a credit card to sign up. So you can get started for free. And then down here, just uncheck that box and you'll be able to send emails 100 messages a day without a credit card, which is pretty nice. So I already set up my account and I have that here, and I'm on the free account as well. And when you come to your Mailgun dashboard, this is what it's going to look like. And there are a couple of things we need to do to get set up with Mailgun. So they have this get started section, and we'll want to create an API key. So if we go to manage the keys, I have one key I already generated, and we can add a new key. And I'll just say demo key, create the key. Now, this is something that you want to keep secret, which is kind of funny because I'm showing it to everyone here on YouTube. And I am going to delete this key before I upload the video. So don't worry, I'm using safe practices. Don't share your API keys. So now that we have an API key generated, we want to add it into our .env file so that we can use it to send emails. So under env example, we'll say Mailgun API key equals, and we'll just leave that blank in the example. And then in the actual env, we will say Mailgun API key equals and paste our key there. Perfect. Now, we are also going to need our domain name. So if we come back over to get started, it says here, set up a custom domain. I'm not going to do that in this demo, but for a production app, you definitely would want your own domain. Mailgun provides us with a domain that we can test with, so we don't need to add our own domain there. If we go over to domain settings and we go to setup, we can see how would you like to send emails from sandbox.mailgun.org. So this is what we want to copy. This is our domain, our testing domain that we can play with. So let's go ahead and add this to our .env as well. There's that. And I'll copy that in here for the example env. Perfect. So now that those are set up, there is one other step that we need to take in Mailgun, and that is to add an authorized recipient. So for testing purposes, they only allow 5 authorized recipients for the sandbox domain. So we want to add our email in here. So I'll add my Nicholson Codes email, add that, and we are unverified. So I can check my email. And let's see if we get something. There we go. We get the verification email from Mailgun. I can click agree and confirm and success. All right, so now if I jump back over and let's say I click refresh, there we go. So my email is now verified, which means Mailgun will send emails to this address with the sandbox domain. It won't send emails to any other email when using this sandbox. So now that we have that all set up, the next thing we can do is put together some code to actually send the email from within our app. In this chapter, we're going to cover email verification with Better Auth. So I'm here in the documentation taking a look at what they have set up here. And we can see that in the auth.ts file, they give us a function called send verification email. Now, sending email verification is important because we want to protect our users. We don't want some malicious actor to be able to take some random email they find online and create an account in our app and then start acting as if they are that person. So with this verification, they're going to get an email sent to that email address, and if this malicious actor isn't able to access that email, they won't be able to verify, and then they won't be able to make any kind of authenticated requests. So they won't be able to use the account, basically. So to do that, we want to open up our auth.ts and kind of copy what they have here, and that'll be a good starting point. So I'm going to grab this function, jump back over to VS Code, over here, and that was inside of email verification. So we'll add that down here, email verification, and add that. And we can see that send email isn't a real function inside of our app yet. So we're going to have to build that out. And here they don't have an example of how to build that out, but that's okay because there is an example inside of the Mailgun dashboard. So what we can do is we want to create a new file over here, and we're going to call this email TS. And this is going to contain the logic to actually send the email. So if we jump back over here and we come over to Mailgun, and you might notice that the UI looks a little bit different. It's funny, they updated the UI in the middle of me recording this video. So what are the chances of that? But here I have my authenticated email for the sandbox environment, and choose a method, API. So we want to send emails via API. And then here's our sandbox domain, base URL, authorized email, and we have a few different programming languages we can pick from. So for us, we're going to pick Node because that's the same as Bun, running JavaScript under the hood. So this is the example that they have, and we're going to closely follow this. So let's jump back over to our code, and they have form data as a package that is installed, and then we want to import Mailgun as well. So if we jump back over here and I open up this, we can say npm mailgun.js and find this package. And this is the official one, so we can npm install mailgun.js, and we can import and then use the new Mailgun. So there's some more instructions here on npm if you are getting stuck. So let's go ahead and grab this one, jump back over to VS Code, and now we're going to install this. So I need a new terminal. Bun at, or I had just copied it, but I'm using Bun, so Bun add Mailgun JS, and then they also use form data. So let's find that package. So form data, let's search here. All right. A library to create readable streams. Okay. Sounds good. Since this is what they recommend in their documentation, this is what we're going to use. So let's add that. There we go. All right. Hopefully it will find that momentarily. And then let's go ahead and create our function that will export send email, and that's because that's what it was called over here. You could name it something else, but I think that's a good name. And then if we look at the example from the Better Auth docs, so there is a user, URL, token, and they are sending over a subject, and a text. So let's do that same thing and expect a, let's see, was it to subject and text, to subject and text. And let's make a type for this. This way we're keeping TypeScript happy and giving us type safety along the way. So to is an email, which is a string. And subject is also a string, and text is a string. And I think I'm missing an equal sign there. There we go. Okay. And then if I add this type, looks good. All right. So then what we want to do is get our environment variables. So we had set those up in here, Mailgun API key and domain. We're going to need both of those. And we can see that here in the example. So they take the API key and then there's the sandbox domain. So let's grab those and put them into our code. Add the domain first. All right, so now that we can use both of those, let's see what else they have for us. So we're going to need to set up the Mailgun with the form data there, and then we can actually try and send the message. So this is not too much code, which is pretty nice. So let's say, why don't we go ahead and copy all of this and bring it over. And this can stay the same. This, we're going to switch over to our Mailgun API key that we set up top. And let's see. So we've seen this TypeScript error before saying it's either string or undefined. And we know that this is not undefined because we have it set in our env. So I'm going to tell TypeScript to ignore that. And when using an EU domain, we're not using an EU domain, so that's not applicable to us, so we can get rid of that. Looks good. And now we get to the actual email. So here's the sandbox domain, but we put that into an environment variable, so let's use that instead. So we'll call that the Mailgun domain. And there we go, saying undefined. We know it is. So TypeScript can ignore that one. And then from to subject text, you know what might be good here is to actually pull this out into a separate variable like message data. And we're getting our to subject text up here. So we need to put from, and let's just say Nicholson codes, and then they have postmaster at sandbox. We're going to just say no reply at, and let's do some string interpolation so we can put the domain, the Mailgun domain, because that's what they're using here, this Mailgun domain, so we can plug that in. All right. And then 2 will be the 2 that is passed in up here. So it'll be 2, 2, but there's actually a shortcut in JavaScript that when it's the same word, you can just put 2. So then we can do subject and text. So we're pulling that off of whatever's being sent to our function, which makes this function reusable, which is super nice. So then we can actually delete all of that, and we can put our message data right in there. And our code is spilling over the side a little bit, so let me change the font down to 18. So there we go. Able to see a little bit more. And I'm still getting an error up here. Cannot find module data. Oh, from data. All right, I misspelled that. That's life as a developer. Form data. Okay. Module can only be default imported to a require statement. Let's go ahead and do that. This is the old school way of doing it, so I prefer to use an import. And then, of course, it tells me can be converted to an import. So maybe TypeScript is a little unhappy and I just need to configure it differently in the tsconfig. But for now, I'm just going to leave that since it was giving me red squigglies before. And now we've got, all right, so we've got our message data, we've got our client, and it's looking like we might have everything we need here. So they have the console log to see what the data is, and then we can catch an error, console.error. All right. And changing that to console.error because that's a little bit more specific and it'll show up red in the terminal. Okay, so I think that's everything that we need here. Let's jump back over to our auth ts, and it's saying it can't find that, so we need to import it. So let's import send email from .email, and I prefer the @ /lib/email, and I forgot a comma there. So before we actually test this out and send an email, we're going to need to add require email verification as true. And this will protect the account so they won't be able to make any authorized actions unless that email is verified. And then down here, I also want to say send on sign up. So that means we can test this by creating a new user and with the email address that's verified in Mailgun, and then we should get an email and we should be able to click that and see that verification happen. So let's go ahead and give that a go. And we can do that by coming over here to our Better Auth Open API docs, and we can sign up and do the test runner. Then in here, let's create a new one of me and add this. And it's important you use the Mailgun verified email here if you're using the sandbox environment. Yeah, this one. Otherwise, you won't get an email. So now that I have that, we can just say password 123, and we can send this. All right, so we got a 200 OK. Looks good. Now let's jump over to my email, and these will sometimes end up in spam because they're coming from the sandbox domain. So I did not receive an email, and I came over to my terminal to check my local server, and I saw that I had a bad request, and it's saying from parameter is not a valid address. So let's go ahead and check out what is going on there. Here's my from parameter, and I can see that I forgot to put a closing caret there on the end. So I'm going to save that. Okay, local dev server is good. Now I am going to try again. And I just thought maybe the user was created. Okay, yeah, so my user was created, and I'm gonna go ahead and just delete both of these users at this point, and that way I can recreate it. Otherwise, it'll tell me that email is already in use. And all right, so nice clean local database. Come over here, I've got my setup, I'm going to click send again. All right, we got a new ID. And if I come over to my database, I can see here is my user, verified email of false. So that's all looking good. And then if we go back over here and we check our logs, all right, we got a status of 200 from Mailgun, queued, thank you. All right, sweet. So that is good news. And let's see if we can actually find that email. All right, there it is. So from Nick Olson Codes, verify your email address. And it's saying this looks fishy. Well, yeah, definitely coming from a sandbox environment, it looks very fishy. But when you put a production domain in there, it will look better. So I'm going to say it looks safe because I know it came from me. And if I come back over here, all right, click the link to verify your email. And we can see localhost 3000 with my token. So if I go ahead and click this, we get hello Hono. So it redirected us back to the root. And if we then go back over to our database view and I refresh this, there it is, email verified of true. Awesome. So we've now got our email verification set up. So users can verify that they actually own that email, and we can keep our application safer by doing that. In this chapter, we're going to set up some protected routes with Better Auth. So let's say we have a to-do list app and only users who are signed in should be able to create to-dos, and users should only be able to see their own to-dos, not those of others. We can do this with Better Auth and Hono. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to create a custom middleware with Hono that will run before our to-do routes, and we can get the user's session. If we don't have a signed in user, then we can reject that request. But if we do have a signed in user, then we can fetch or create to-dos with their user ID, so that way they don't access anyone else's to-dos. So I'm going to quickly create a table for to-dos. Here I'm going to have a UUID, and I need to import that here for my ID, set that as the primary key, and default it to a random one, so we don't need to worry about providing it. And then we want our to-dos to be linked to a user. So to do that, we can do user ID of text, because that's what the ID is down here, and we want to match that up. And then we can say user ID not null. So this is required. We're not going to create any to-dos in our database unless there is a user to go along with it. And then we want to say this is from the user table .id. So it'll be user.id. There we go. And then if the user is deleted, we can set a policy on delete to cascade, which will then delete all of the to-dos for that user. And that is good practice. Then let's say our to-dos will have a title and a description. So title, and this can be a varchar. And we can set the length of these. So let's just say that we don't want the title to be more than 500 characters. And not null, this is going to be required. And then the description can also be a varchar. And we'll make it the length a little bit longer. We'll say 1000. And this one's optional, so we're not going to put not null on there. And I forgot a comma right there. And then a to-do could either be completed or incomplete. So we'll add completed as a Boolean. And default that to false, because most of the time when you're creating a new to-do, it is not completed yet. And we can add a created at and updated at timestamps. Timestamp with time zone, and default that to now when it's created. And then I'll just duplicate that and update this to updated at. There we go. So we've got our new table added to the schema. So in order to get this added to our database, we need to create a new migration. So we just have the one here, and so we can do that from our terminal. We'll say bun run database generate migration. And there we go, 5 tables. We can now see to-dos there. We can see our new migration, create table for to-dos. So that all looks good. And now that we have that migration, we can run it. So if you remember here, we just use this to generate migration. We'll use this to run the migration and get that table into our database. Run database migrate. There we are. So now we can jump over to our studio, and if I click refresh, we can see we now have our to-dos table. Perfect. So everything is looking good there. So the next step that we're going to do is to create a couple of queries for our database. So we want a couple of routes, a route where a user can insert a to-do and a route where a user can get all of their to-dos. So in order to make that happen, we need a couple of database queries. We'll need a query to insert a to-do and a query to fetch all to-dos by user ID. So let's create a queries TS file. And then inside of here, let's import our database connection. And then let's first create a function to insert a to-do. And this will be asynchronous because we're working with the database. And this will take a parameter of a new to-do that should be created. And here the question is, what should this to-do look like? Creating a new to-do. Well, if we talk about Drizzle here, so we have our database table. Drizzle actually gives us a way to take this table and infer the type to create a new to-do. So let me show you what I mean by that. And this will help us keep consistent with TypeScript and make sure we have a nice type-safe experience while coding. So let's create a types file. And inside of here, we can import a type from Drizzle, infer select model, and the infer insert model. So these are referencing whether you're selecting data or inserting data into your database. And Drizzle is going to be able to create the types for us. And then we just need to bring in the schema for to-dos, or for our to-dos table. All right, looking good. Now we can actually infer the type from the table. So that'll be a to-do type created from the database, and we can hover over it and see exactly what's on there. And those are all of our fields from our schema. So that's very handy. And then what if we want to create a new to-do? Then the thing is, we don't provide an ID because that's defaulted, and the created at and updated at also get defaulted, so we don't need to provide those either. So this will give us a type where those fields are optional. So let's hover over this and you'll see exactly what I mean. So here you can see the question mark, meaning that the ID is optional, created at and updated at, and also description and completed are all optional. So these are the two required fields in order to create a new record in our database for it to do. And so this is super handy. Now that we have this type, we can jump back over here and we can import that. And this will stay in sync with our schema if we ever make changes to our schema here, if we ever were to add new columns. And that's really nice to have that consistent type safe experience as you're making changes to your schema. So now that we know what this data is going to look like as it's coming in, we want to write our query. So let's do here, we'll say just constant the result, and we will await and use our database connection to insert. And then we need to specify where we're inserting, which is the to-dos table. So to-dos, and I need to import that from schema. Insert into to-dos the values of the to-do that was provided. And we can say returning, so it'll give us back the item that was inserted. And if we hover over this, we can see what our result is. Our result is a brand new to-do inside of an array. So we can destructure that off and return this result, because we don't need to send an array back. We're only going to be inserting one to-do at a time. And then when we hover over this result, we can see exactly what we are returning, a new to-do that was just created. So that's perfect. That will do the job for us for inserting. And then the next thing we can do is create a query to get the to-dos by user ID. The user ID will be a string, and we can see that here, text and text from our user table. And then from here, we want to select all of the to-dos where the user ID that's provided equals the user ID in the database and get that list back. So we can treat it just like like writing regular SQL, where we have a select statement, and we're going to select from our to-dos table where the to-do user ID And there's a special equal, there we go, from Drizzle, get that imported. And I can say todos.user ID equals the user ID that was provided to the function. Now let me save for formatting quick so we can look at that. And why don't we go ahead and order this too? So usually you would expect the newest to-do to be on top. So there is a descending function that Drizzle has, and then we can put the todos.created at date right in there. And there we go. So let's hover over this and see what we're going to get returned. We can see we're going to get a list of to-dos back, and that's exactly what we want. We want to return that whole list. So let's just go ahead and return the to-do list. And that covers it for our queries. So the next step to get our protected routes working is to set up a custom middleware inside of Hono. And so here in the Better Auth documentation, they have an example of how to set this up with Hono. So if we look at the integrations down here in Hono, we can see they have a lot more information here. So if you need to reference any of this, this is a great place to find some of this information. They have info on how to set up cores too, but I'm going to skip over that for the moment and jump down to this middleware. So if we take a look at this, we can see they set up some environment variables so that Hono is aware of the user and the session. And then here is the middleware code where it grabs the session using off of the auth get session and basically says if there's no session, return next, and it's setting session to null. And then down here, if there is a session, we can pull out the user and the session from that function there. So we're going to do something a lot like this. So let's jump over to our code. And I'm going to create a new file. Actually, I'm going to create a new folder. So it's good to keep our folders clean, and middlewares are often put into their own folder. So we can do that, and then we can add a file for our auth middleware. And then inside of here, we can use Hono's create middleware function. So let's find that, create middleware. Oh, that's the wrong one. I want it from Hono. There we go. And then we can import our auth file here. That gives us all of our auth settings. So let's bring that in. And then we can create our middleware. So we will create a new function, auth middleware. And now we can use that create middleware. And it provides us the context and next. And so at the end of the function, we will call next because that's telling it to go to the next middleware until all of the different middleware functions have run, and then it will run the route. And that's what we want. We want to run this middleware before our to-do routes so that we can verify our user. So if we jump back over to the documentation here, I want, we can go ahead and copy all of that. And take a look at it really quick. So we're pulling off the session using our auth instance, and I'm going to do something slightly different here. So I don't want to return next if there's no session. I want to actually just return an unauthorized instead. That way, this does not continue to execute any code afterwards. If we don't have a user, then we're just going to return 401 and tell them you can't use this route. And this is different from the example here because they're applying this middleware to all routes. You can see with the star here, app.use on star. That's what the way they set it up. But I'm not going to apply this middleware to every route. I'm only going to apply it to the to-do routes. And then this can stay the same. So I want to set the session user and the session. And if we hover over this, we can see TypeScript helps us out and what this would look like. So that's where our session and our user are on there, or it is null. Cool. So there's one more step we can do to make this a little bit nicer, and that is this right here. So we can copy this, and this is actually going to help give us a little boost with TypeScript and help Hono understand that after this middleware runs, the route now has access to the user and the session. And so we can do that. I like to keep all my types in one place. So we're going to put this here. And I'm going to call this Hono. This will be a little bit different. They set this to a variable of app. I'm going to have this be a type. And then I just need to import auth. There we go. Now I can use this here, and we can plug that Hono environment in like that. And that'll help out our route in just a moment. So that wraps it up for our middleware. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a validator. And what this is going to do is it's going to protect our route. So we're going to have a route that will allow users to create a to-do. And if the user sends bad data, we want to reject that request. So that's what the validator is going to do for us. And so we can create a validators folder. And then inside of here, create a new validator. And we're going to use Zod to do our validation because Hono has a great Zod middleware that they already have built out. So let's go ahead and install that. So we'll need to bun add Zod and the middleware, which is a Hono Zod validator. All right. And now that we have those, we can import them, the Z validator, and import Z from Zod. Now we can set the schema of what it should look like, what the data structure should look like when somebody is hitting our route to create a new to-do. So we want to allow them to give us a title, a description, and completed. So let's set up this schema. I'll call it create the to-do schema. And then we'll say a title for the to-do can be provided. That is a string. And it should have a minimum length of 1. And if it doesn't, if that fails, we can put a message in here and say title is required. And then we can add the description, which is also a string. And this one can be optional. We don't need the description to create a record in our database. And same with completed, which is a Boolean, true or false. And this one, instead of saying optional, I'll just default to false. I also like to add the strict function on the end here. And what that's going to do is say if somebody sends an additional data point that's not one of these 3, it's going to throw an error and say, hey, that's not an allowed argument, so remove it and then try again. Now that we have our schema set up here, we can put our validator to work. So we can create a Zod validator middleware using the schema, and then that will be able to protect our route. So let's set up a new variable here. And then this first argument here, we have a few different options, and we are going to choose JSON because this will be a post request to create a new to-do, and so we're going to pull that off of the JSON body. And then we can add the second argument here. TypeScript is helping us out and saying is the schema. So we can do the create to-do schema. And then the third argument is a hook function. And the hook function is going to allow us to verify if the result was successful or failed, and then return a message based on that. So that function provides us a result and a context. And let's see if I can save to get some formatting. There we go, looks a little bit nicer. Now open up this hook again, and we can check if the result was successful. And we get the autocomplete. So if result was not successful, then I want to send a 400 bad request. So we can do that by saying return context.json and open this up and say errors. And we can take a look at our result dot error. And this has, it's a little bit nested. So we'll pull the issues off of the error, and then we will map through all of the issues. And we will say for each issue, issue singular dot message. We'll pull off all those error messages because there could be multiple. So that's why this issues is an array. And then we map over that array, get the messages, and return that in a nice clean format for the user. Otherwise, it will be a lot of information for them. So there we go. Our Zod middleware is all set up. So now that we have all of our supporting logic done, we can create our to-do routes. So I'm going to come over here to the folder structure and create a routes folder, and then create a to-dos routes ts file. And this will house our to-do routes. So we need to import Hono here. And then we can also import our auth middleware that we created. We can import the queries we created. We can import our Hono environment. And last thing is to import our validator. So as you can see, this is where the rubber meets the road. We put in all this work to create the middleware, our queries, our type, and validator. So now we can easily put together our routes. So let's go ahead and set up our Hono to-do route. We need to call a new Hono. There we go. And then on the to-dos, we can say we want our auth middleware to run on every to-do route. So to do that, we can say todos.use the auth middleware. There we go. Then let's say we want to get all of our to-dos. Well, we can just say todos.get / and this will pass the context. And then we can pull off the user from our auth middleware that put the user into the context for us. Now you see here that we're getting a red squiggly. So so TypeScript doesn't understand that the user is available to us due to the middleware. And that's where this Hono environment comes in. So adding this up here, we are telling TypeScript that, hey, we know that the middleware has added in the user, and what that's going to look like is user and session. So that's why we put together that Hono environment, to give us that type safety here. Now what we want to do, we have the user, we want to get all of the to-dos by their user ID. So we're going to make that database query. So we can wrap this in a try catch just in case the database query fails for some reason. And we can get their to-do list. So get to-dos by user ID. And then if we do our user, we get autocomplete on here too. So TypeScript knows what we're looking at, which is awesome. So we're getting a red squiggly here, which is saying argument of type string or undefined is not assignable here. We need to have a user ID. So that's interesting. So this it had put that question mark in there for me. But if we remove that and we hover over user, user is possibly null. The thing is, though, our user is not actually possibly null because our middleware, I had set this up so that if there is no session, then we return a 401. So we wouldn't even reach that code. So we actually know that our user is guaranteed to be there. And so what that means is I had made an error here. I copy pasted this Hono environment from the Better Auth documentation, and they have this or null right here because that worked for their setup, but my setup here is a little bit different. So I'm actually going to remove that or null because we know that we will have a user here. So there we go. We've fixed that TypeScript error. And now here we have a list of to-dos that we fetched by that user's ID, and we can give that user their to-do list by returning that in the form of JSON. And just return the to-do list. And if there is some error, the database throws an error for some reason, we can do a console.error and log that out for us. Error fetching to-dos, and put that error in there, and then this would log on our server so that we could use that to debug. And then we would want to return a 500 error to the user. 500 stands for internal server error, so some kind of error we didn't expect to happen. And put that 500 code. So just let the user know we failed to fetch the to-dos. All right. And then I want to set up our other route for creating a to-do. So for creating a to-do, we would do a post request, and post requests come with a body, a JSON body. And so we can add our middleware here to validate that body. So that Zod validator is going to check the data that the user is sending us and make sure that it is valid, and that way we can protect our system. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to get our user just like we did up here. And when we create that to-do, we'll create it tied to that user. And then we also want to get the data that they sent us. And the Zod middleware function here provides us an easy way to grab that validated data. So we can just say to-do data. And off of the context, we can now go to the request, and valid is our option, and we can pull it off of JSON, as you can see there. And then we even get some TypeScript support here, which I love. So we can see what that data is, right? Our title, completed, and description. And that all comes from the validator that we set up here. So all of that setup is paying off now. And now that we have the user and the to-do they want to insert into the database, we can run that query, which we have our insert to-do query. So let's wrap that in a try catch too, just in case there's some kind of database error when running this function. And we can say const new to-do equals await insert to-do. And then here we're going to send an object, and we need to combine our to-do data right here and our user ID into one object. So the way to do that is we can do ... which is spread syntax in JavaScript, and that will put all of the key value pairs from to-do data into this new object, and then we can add in the new user ID from our user.id right up there. And now we have a new object with both the to-do data and the user ID. So then we can hover over here and we can see our query is then giving us back the to-do that gets inserted to the database. And then we can let the user know here is the to-do that was inserted. So we can return JSON, the new to-do, and provide a status code of 201, which stands for an item being created, successfully created. Then we can handle our error case. So we'll say console.error and say there was an error creating the to-do. And log that. And that will help us out if we ever need to debug our error. And then we can tell the user that there was some kind of internal server error again, just like up above. So c.json error, we failed to create the to-do. And 500, there was an internal server error. Something went wrong with our database. All right, so now we have our two routes set up. We've got our auth middleware on there, and what we can do is import these routes into our main index file. So if we take a look at this, we can bring them in, import to-dos from to-do routes, and then down here we can chain on .route, and we can say API to-dos, and this will be prefixed onto our routes. So here we have just slash. When the user calls it, it will be slash API to-dos get, and then that would get the list of that user's to-dos. So then we want to actually pass in the to-dos that we just imported up there. And so those routes will be added onto our main app, which is really nice. So let's save that. And before we test this out, there's one other thing I want to do. Come back over to the documentation, and we can see CORS, the CORS example that they have. So CORS is best practice. We definitely want to protect our app from, it stands for cross origin request scripting, I think that's what it is. And we can go ahead and just copy this and jump back over to our code. Put that there, and we need to import this CORS. Will it give me, nope, doesn't want to give me the import. No worries, we can copy that here from Hono/CORS. And for us, we're running on localhost 3000, not 301. And if I was deploying this to production, we would want our actual domain here. And this would protect our app from our front end ever trying to make requests to a different back end. And we're saying we only want to accept requests from the same origin, or if there are other origins, we could add them in here. So now that we have all of this set up, we can go ahead and test it out and see if it's all working. And we can do that with the index.http file. So I have my local dev server running. I haven't restarted it in a little bit, so let's restart this just as I made a lot of changes. And now put that down. So we did get that hello Hono response there for our main route, which is good. So our local dev server is running. Now let's say I want to create a new to-do. So it would be over here, API to-dos, and this would be a post request because that's how we set it up here, to-dos post. And then I need to provide a body. So this would be content type, application JSON, And then we have a title. Let's say take out the trash is my to-do. And then we can add a description. At 6 p.m. And if we take a look at our validator, so what's required? Title is really the only required thing because completed gets defaulted and description is optional. So this should work. The thing is, I'm not signed in. So let's see what happens when I send this request. This is a good thing. This is exactly what we were expecting. 401 unauthorized. So error, unauthorized. And that's because I'm not signed in. So that means our middleware is working. So our auth middleware, it was checking for my session and it said, hey, you're not logged in, so you're unauthorized. You cannot create a to-do. So how can we log in and make a to-do? Well, back over here in our REST client file, let's go ahead and log in. So if you remember, we have our Better Auth documentation here. So I already have a user. Let's verify that. So we have Nick Olson codes, and I'm verified, so I can create to-dos now. And if I come back over here, so I have the user, I need to sign in. So let's take a look at this. So I need, let's click the test request, localhost 3000 API auth, sign in, email, and these are the values I need. All right, let's copy that. Jump back over here. And this is a post request. And to separate these, we put the 3 hash symbols. So post 3. Oh, I'm even getting some autocomplete there, which is really nice. API auth. That's not correct. API auth sign in email. API auth sign in email. Content type. No autocomplete. Oh, because I put content length. Content type application JSON. There we go. And I had previously copied that body, and we're not going to use those. All right, so there's my verified email, and the password was password123. Now I just need to remove that stray comma down there. JSON doesn't like lingering commas. And if I send request, we get a 200. All right, so here we can see the set cookie. We get our Better Auth session token. And now we get the user back as well. So that's all looking good. We are now signed in now that we have this cookie. So we can go ahead and try again to create a to-do. All right, look at that. So everything is coming together. We get a 201 created, and we get the to-do that we created in the database. So we get the ID, the user it's tied to, and all of that information. So now if we go check out our database, and I click on to-dos, we can see our to-do has been added into the database. That's pretty cool. All right, now let's see if we can fetch all the to-dos. So let me go ahead and create like 3 to-dos. So take out the trash, clean the kitchen, Send that. And pick up the baby toys. Send that. All right, so let me hit refresh on the database view. Okay, cool. We've got 3 to-dos in the database tied to our user. And now if I wanted to get all of those to-dos, let's create a new request. This one's a get. And it's the same route, but get instead of post. And let's go ahead and give that a go. Click send. And there we go. Here's our response. We have all 3 to-dos. So the last thing that I want to test out and make sure is working correctly is that when we are fetching the to-dos, currently we only have 1 user in the database, so I'm getting back these 3, but I want to make sure that a user can only get the to-dos that are assigned to their user ID. And that's how we set it up, but I want to verify it manually and make sure that's how it's working. So we can quickly jump over here and create a new user. So let's sign up. Let's make a test request. And we'll say someone else. And we'll do the same password. 1, 2, 3 for easy testing. There we go. All right. So let's send that. Okay, 200. Okay. And if we jump over to our database and we go to our users, let's make sure. There we go. We've got our second user. So now if we jump back over here and we want to sign in as test at test.com, it's telling us email not verified. And that's right, we didn't verify this email, and that would mean we'd have to go over to Mailgun and have them send an email and verify it. But the easier way for testing is to just come over to the database and switch that up and save that to true. So now if we try this again, all right, we get the 200 okay, we get our new cookie. So we are now signed in as test at test.com. And let's create some to-dos as this tester. Do some testing. All right, we got a 201 created and more testing. Send that, 201 created. Perfect. Okay, now if I send request, let's see what we get. Perfect. So this is exactly what we want. We only get 2 to-dos as this user ID, the testing one, the 2 testing to-dos that I just created, and we do not get those other 3 to-dos that I created for myself. And there we go. We can see we've got 5 rows, but only 2 were returned for the user. So that is all working as expected. So this is where I'm going to wrap up the demo. We now have a working project. We have Better Auth working inside of our Hono REST API. So we can create users and protect our routes based on if a user is signed in or not. Now, there is so much more to Better Auth. It is a very robust authentication library, and so feel free to dig in deeper. Some of the other callouts that I want to name are here in the plugins, things like two-factor authentication and passkeys, and you can set up an admin role so you can have routes that are only accessible to an admin. That's very useful. And other third-party plugins, Stripe, Bowler, etc. So it's a very robust production grade library, and Now you have a working project that you can build off of, and I hope it serves you well. Happy coding and Godspeed.